Let us begin. How emotionally immature parents affect their adult children's lives. So let's get a little intro here. Emotional loneliness comes from not having enough emotional intimacy with other people. It can start in childhood due to feeling emotionally unseen by self-preoccupied parents, or it can arise in adulthood when an emotional connection is lost. If it's been a lifelong feeling, it points to the likelihood of not being sufficiently emotionally responded to as a child. Growing up in a family with emotionally immature parents is a lonely experience. Thank you, Julie. These parents may look and act perfectly normal, caring for their child's physical health and providing meals and safety. However, if they don't make a solid emotional connection with their child, the child will have a gaping hole where true security might have been. And so this is for everybody who thinks like, well, I didn't have like the big T traumas, as we call them. You know, my parents were there. I was fed and clothed. I didn't experience, horrific abuses. So what do I have to complain about is usually the feeling that people will put out there, right? I shouldn't complain because I know people have it so much worse. And what she's saying here is that doesn't matter. It's not necessarily about the things that happen. It's what doesn't happen. And that thing that doesn't happen is an emotional connection. So regardless of whether in addition to that emotional disconnect, there was physical abuse or any type of verbal abuse or anything like that, big neglect, regardless of whether that was added on, the core, the thing that unifies everybody who went through this is this lack of emotional connection. I'd love to hear from anybody again who's willing to share. Do you consider what you went through as big T traumas, kind of the big things that we think of when we talk about trauma? Or is it more of what this paragraph is talking about, the little T traumas, which is just that emotional disconnect from the parent, even though to an outsider, it might have seemed like, oh, your parents were fine. What do you complain about? They were nice. You had clothes, you had food, right? The two types. The loneliness of feeling unseen by others is as fundamental a pain as physical injury, but it doesn't show on the outside. Emotional loneliness is a vague and private experience, not easy to see or describe. You might call it a feeling of emptiness or being alone in the world. Some people have called this existential loneliness, but there's nothing existential about it. If you feel it, it came from your family. And this is what she's talking about, is this feeling of emptiness or being alone in the world. How many people have felt that, right? And, probably sometimes now we still experience that. Hopefully it's a much lower level than whenever it was at your peak, especially for anybody already putting in the work of reading these self-healing books, this book, other books that we've been covering, like The Untethered Soul, The Power of Now. Hopefully that feeling of loneliness in the universe has at the very least, been reduced some. But it might still be present, and that's okay. There's a lot of work to do to overcome this stuff. Children have no way of identifying a lack of emotional intimacy in their relationship with a parent. It isn't a concept they have, and it's even less likely that they can understand that their parents are emotionally immature. All they have is a gut feeling of emptiness, which is how a child experiences loneliness. With a mature parent, the child's remedy for loneliness is simply to go to the parent for affectionate connection. But if your parent was scared of deep feelings, you might have been left with an uneasy sense of shame for needing and comforting. When the children of emotionally immature parents grow up, the core emptiness remains, even if they have a superficially normal adult life. Their loneliness can continue into adulthood if they unwittingly choose relationships that can't give them enough emotional connection. They may go to school, work, marry, and raise children, but all the while, they'll still be haunted by that core sense of emotional isolation. In this chapter, we'll look at people's experience of emotional loneliness, along with how self-awareness helped them understand what they were missing and how to change. On a scale of 1 to 10, How much of this core sense of emotional isolation do you feel now versus when you were at your peak, if you're not at your peak now, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, to repeat, on a scale of 1 to 10, what level is your core sense of emotional isolation now versus at your peak? Emotional intimacy involves knowing that you have someone you can tell anything to, someone to go to with all your feelings about anything and everything. You feel completely safe opening up to the other person, whether in the form of words, through an exchange of looks, or by just being together quietly in a state of connection. Emotional intimacy is profoundly fulfilling, creating a sense of being seen for who you really are. It can only exist when the other person seeks to know you, not judge you. As children, the basis for our security is emotional connection with our caretakers. Emotionally engaged parents make children feel that they always have someone to go to. Right? And another question to ask ourselves, right? Did I have someone where regardless of the situation, I could go to them and I could share my inner experience? I can share my struggles. I could share my fears. I could share my pains with, right? And for many of us, unfortunately, that wasn't the case. This kind of security requires genuine emotional interactions with parents. Parents who are emotionally mature engage in this level of emotional connection almost all the time. They've developed enough self-awareness to be comfortable with their own feelings as well as those of other people. More importantly, they're emotionally attuned to their children, noticing their children's moods and welcoming their feelings with interest. And that's kind of, an overview of what do we talk about when we're talking about emotionally immature parents. It's the exact opposite of this, right? It's not being attuned to the children, not noticing their moods, and not welcoming their feelings with interest. That's a good, succinct overview of what we're talking about when it comes to this book. A child feels safe connecting with such a parent, whether seeking comfort or sharing enthusiasm. Mature parents make their children feel that they enjoy engaging with them and that it's fine to talk about emotional issues. These parents have a lively, balanced emotional life and are usually consistent in their attentiveness and interest toward their children. They are emotionally dependable. Right, so you may have had that experience with one parent, if you were lucky. Or you might have had to wait to do it for yourself. And the problem, which we'll look at later in this book, is that in relationships, we often try and find someone who will fill that role. But then we become too demanding of, internally of what we expect them to be, how we expect them to be, looking for them to rescue us in some way. And that's where a lot of relationship problems originate. So let's look at the idea of emotional loneliness. And again, if you're not in the book club, today is our first day of reading from this. We've already met with the author one time this past Sunday. That's recorded. And over the next month, we'll meet with her 3 more times to discuss everything that goes on here. She's a wonderfully validating human being, so knowledgeable. So if you'd like to join us for that in the 3 more sessions that we have with her, just check the link in the bio. Let's talk about emotional loneliness now. Parents who are emotionally immature, on the other hand, are so self-preoccupied that they don't notice their children's inner experience. In addition, they discount feelings and they fear emotional intimacy. They're uncomfortable with their own emotional needs and therefore have no idea how to offer support at an emotional level. Such parents may even become nervous and angry if their children get upset, punishing them instead of comforting them. These reactions shut down children's instinctive urge to reach out, closing the door to emotional contact. Wow. And I guess I should preface all this in our reading for those who haven't heard this before and are not in the book club and understand how we're going through this. This is not about blaming our parents. This is not to get one up on them. This is not to send your parents this video and say, "Ha, I knew it. It's all your fault." For us, this is for us to understand our experience, the language and insight that we can finally explain to ourselves what our experience excuse me, what our experience was. And through that, we now can develop strategies for how do I deal with what I experienced, right? Rather than just having this pit of emptiness, this existential, well, she said it's not existential, this feeling of emotional disconnect from our parents, feeling of emptiness and aloneness in the world, instead of just going through that with this feeling of like, I don't know why I feel like that. I have everything I should want, right? I have the family, I have the job, I should feel better than this. Why am I still feeling so empty and alone? Now we have the insight, the understanding of where that came from, and that allows us to take the first steps in healing from that. Right? So it's not for our parents. This book is not for your parents. It's for you. People always come into my comments and say, I need to send this to my parents. And I say, it's not for them. It's for you. It's for the understanding, not the blame. Right? That's an important distinction. If one or both of your parents weren't mature enough to give you emotional support, as a child, you would have felt the effect of not having it, but you wouldn't necessarily have known what was wrong. You might have thought that feeling empty and alone was your own private, strange experience, something that made you different from other people. As a child, you had no way of knowing that this hollow feeling is a normal, universal response to lacking adequate human companionship. Right? That's important for everybody to hear, right? As a child, you had no way of knowing that this hollow feeling is a normal, universal response to lacking adequate human companionship. Emotional loneliness is a term that suggests its own cure, being on the receiving end of another person's sympathetic interest in what you're feeling. This type of loneliness isn't an odd or senseless feeling. It's the predictable result of growing up without sufficient empathy from others. To round out this description of emotional loneliness, let's look at two people who vividly remember this feeling from childhood and describe it well. Here's how my client David responded when I commented that growing up in his family sounded lonely. It was incredibly lonely, like I was utterly isolated. It was a fact of my existence. It just felt normal. In my family, everyone was separate from each other, and we were all emotionally isolated. We lived parallel lives with no points of contact. In high school, I used to get this image of floating in the ocean with no one around me. That's how it felt at home. When I asked him more about the feelings of loneliness, he said it was a sensation of emptiness and nothingness. I had no way of knowing that most people didn't feel that way. That feeling was just daily life for me. I'm wondering how many people here can relate with that feeling of, in my family, everyone was separate from each other and we were all emotionally isolated. We lived parallel lives with no points of contact. Does that resonate with you? I'd love to hear. Awesome, Val. Come join us. We've just begun it in the book club. Yes, can confirm. I was an only child and isolated, 90%. Definitely resonated. Yes, me and my two siblings. Yes. And then let's look at this other experience. Tell me if this resonates as well. Rhonda remembered a similar aloneness when she was 7 years old, standing by the moving truck outside her family's old house with her parents and 3 older siblings. Although she was technically with her family, no one was touching her, and she felt totally alone. I was standing there with my family, but nobody had really explained what this move would mean. I felt totally alone, trying to figure out what was going on. I was with my family, but I didn't feel like I was with them. I remember feeling exhausted, wondering how I was going to deal with this on my own. I didn't feel like I could ask any questions. They were totally unavailable to me. I was too anxious to share anything with them, and I knew it was on me to cope with this alone. And that final sentence is really the one that hits hard, right? I knew it was on me to cope with this alone. Right? Who resonates with that feeling in childhood? And this was, for me, an exceptionally, it validating paragraph, because we moved a lot when I was a kid, not just, different cities, but we moved countries and changed languages. And through it, I'm sure we had some conversation, my parents and I, but I don't really remember them. And I'm sure they were very short. And it wasn't like, the way we'd be with our son now, which is really helping him through the entire experience, constantly checking in on him, making sure that he's okay. Allowing that conversation to continue for a long time, through the move, before the move, through the move, and after the move. For me, I wouldn't be surprised if I could go back in time and see how it played out, that it was just one conversation. Hey, we're moving. This is what's happening. Let's go. I'm not the author of the book, but in our book club for the next month, we are meeting with the author. We already met with her once, and we'll meet with her 3 more times. So if you'd like to join us for that, click the link in the bio. This kind of emotional pain and loneliness is actually a healthy message. The anxiety felt by David and Rhonda was letting them know that they were in dire need of emotional contact. But because their parents didn't notice how they felt, all they could do was keep their feelings inside. Fortunately, once you start listening to your emotions instead of shutting them down, they will guide you toward an authentic connection with others. Knowing the cause of your emotional loneliness is the first step toward finding more fulfilling relationships. So this is for everybody who's in my comments constantly on the videos asking, okay, great, but what do we do about it? This is the beginning of that answer, right? Listening to your emotions instead of shutting down. Building the awareness, which is what we're doing through this book, building the awareness of what my experience was, knowing the root cause of it, that is the beginning of how we begin to heal from it. Agreed, 80s Amazon. This book is life-altering. Let's keep going. So let's see if you recognize yourself in this. How children cope with emotional loneliness. Emotional loneliness is so distressing that a child who experiences it will do whatever is necessary to make some kind of connection with the parent. These children may learn to put other people's needs first as the price of admission to a relationship. Instead of expecting others to provide support or show interest in them, they may take on the role of helping others, convincing everyone that they have few emotional needs of their own. Unfortunately, this tends to create even more loneliness, since covering up your deepest needs prevents genuine connection with others. And so if you've struggled with people pleasing, this starts to help explain why. Lacking adequate parental support or connection, many emotionally deprived children are eager to leave childhood behind. They perceive that the best solution is to grow up quickly and become self-sufficient. These children become competent beyond their years, but lonely at their core. Wow. They often jump into adulthood prematurely, getting jobs as soon as they can, becoming sexually active, marrying early, or joining the service. It's as though they're saying, since I'm already taking care of myself, I might as well go ahead and get the benefits of growing up fast. They look forward to adulthood, believing it offers freedom and a chance to belong. Sadly, in the rush to leave home, they may end up marrying the wrong person, tolerating exploitation, or staying with a job that takes more than it gives. They often settle for emotional loneliness in their relationship because it feels normal to them, like their early home life. Wow. That's heavy. And when we met with the author this past weekend, she multiple times she used the word tragic, and that when I spoke to her earlier for the video that's on YouTube for anybody who wants to check it out, I interviewed her before we began this book. She used that word again, and I remember that it really stood out to me. Like all these things, the way that we deal with our loneliness, what our experience was, all these things are tragic because they don't have to be that way, right? If we can develop an understanding of what our experience was, and then we can lean into the emotions, we can release them, right? We can work through them, then we don't have to continue living through this pain as many of us do for years and decades for many people. Why the past repeats itself. If the lack of emotional connection with emotionally mature parents is so painful, why do so many people end up in similarly frustrating relationships in adulthood? The most primitive parts of our brain tell us that safety lies in familiarity. We gravitate to situations we have had experience with because we know how to deal with them. As children, we don't recognize our parents' limitations because seeing our parents as immature or flawed is frightening. Unfortunately, by denying the painful truths about our parents, we aren't able to recognize similarly hurtful people. And I see this in my comments all the time, being like, well, my parents beat me, but I turned out fine. My parents hit me, I turned out fine, right? Meanwhile, they probably have, if we took a deep dive, you'd probably find a lot of coping mechanisms that indicate that maybe you're not as fine as you think. Right. And it's exactly what she says here, right? Seeing our parents as immature or flawed is frightening, even in adulthood sometimes, if we don't have the capacity to deal with it. This book is Adult Children of Emotionally Mature Parents. We're dealing with it all month long in our book club and meeting with the author as well. You could click the link in my bio to learn more. I apologize for that if it just jumped. I got a call coming in. Denial makes us repeat the same situation over and over because we never see it coming the next time. That's heavy. Austin, Kirsten, come join us. Kids need to feel safe and heard. Apologize when it goes wrong. Exactly right, Water. Let's listen to this. I found this line. Well, let's just read the whole thing, actually. I have a special place in my heart for people like Sophie. That's a story that we didn't read here, but you'll get the idea. Who function so well that other people think they have no problems. So if you're a high-functioning child of emotionally mature parents, right? You've managed to go on with your life, right? You're not on the streets. You're not in jail, right? You're going on with your life. You have a job. You have a family, or any part of that. But you still feel this core loneliness. This is what she's talking about here. In fact, their competence makes it hard for them to take their own pain seriously. I have it all, they're likely to say. I should be happy. Why do I feel so miserable? This is the classic confusion of a person whose physical needs were met in childhood while emotional needs remained unfulfilled. People like Sophie often feel guilty for complaining. Men and women alike will list the things they have to be thankful for as if their life were an addition problem whose positive sum means nothing can be wrong. If you read that again, that is a very heavy-duty sentence right there. But they can't shake the feeling of being fundamentally alone and lacking the level of emotional intimacy they crave in their closest relationships. Wow. Read it again? Okay. Men and women alike will list the things they have to be thankful for, right? I have a job, I have a family, my mate is good enough, I have children, I have family, right? Listing any or all of these things as if just by listing them means that you didn't experience what you experienced, means that you shouldn't have this emotional loneliness, right? Men and women alike will list the things they have to be thankful for as if their life were an addition problem whose positive sum means nothing can be wrong. Wow, heavy. Yes, Mana, exactly right. Few of these people walk into my office with the thought that their lack of satisfying emotional intimacy started in childhood. They are usually mystified as to how they ended up in a life that doesn't make them happy. They struggle with feelings of selfishness for wanting something more out of life. As Sophie initially said, relationships are always going to have frustration. It's work, right? She was partly right. Good relationships do take some effort and forbearance, but it shouldn't take work just to be noticed. Making an emotional connection ought to be the easy part. Wow. Probably so many people in relationships that aren't quite working that need to hear this, right? Yes, it does take work, but no, you shouldn't feel, invisible, or it shouldn't feel like work to just have that basic connection to your mate. That's what relationships are for. If you don't have that connection, then what is the purpose of it, right? Heavy. Thank you for everybody tapping that screen. I appreciate it. Children who feel they cannot engage their parents emotionally often try to strengthen their connection by playing whatever roles they believe their parents want them to. Although this may win them some fleeting approval, it doesn't yield genuine emotional closeness. Emotionally disconnected parents don't suddenly develop a capacity for empathy just because a child does something to please them. And that's the problem, right, of not being ourselves, is that one, we don't get the results that we want, which is emotionally connected parents. And two, we distance ourselves from our true self. And that leads to the imposter syndrome. That leads to the emptiness of a feeling like I shouldn't feel like this. I have everything. My life is pretty good. I should feel happier, but I don't. And that's when, early in life, before we kind of understand this sort of thing, we feel there must be something wrong with me because I should be happy, but I'm not. So clearly I'm broken, when in reality, it's just that we haven't dealt with this disconnect that we experienced in childhood. Heavy. Wow. Anybody who's done therapy, going in thinking like, I feel fine with my parents. My parents did the best they could. And then she talks about that as your true experience is uncovered, as you give yourself as you allow yourself to reflect on the true nature of what you experience, a lot of that anger starts to come up. As she says here, with Jake... he says, he was astounded by how much anger toward his mother we'd unearthed in therapy here. I can't believe how much I hated her, he said. What Jake didn't realize is that hate is normal and involuntary reaction when somebody tries to control you for no good reason. It signals that the person is extinguishing your emotional life force by getting his or her needs met at your expense. And so if there's anybody in here who feels guilt for the negative feelings they have towards their parents, this is your signal to release that guilt, right? It's not about blaming them. It's not about putting this on them. It's about understanding your experience. In your experience, as she says, whatever emotions came out of that are normal and involuntary. You can't control it, so how could you possibly feel guilty about it, right? You're not choosing to feel angry. You're not choosing to feel hate. It's just a natural, involuntary reaction when somebody tries to control you for no good reason. Or contempt, yes. I'll leave that one because I just shared a video. If you want to hear about this feeling trapped in taking care of parents and in relationships, go see my latest video that I posted today. Let's read here. Emotionally immature parents don't know how to validate their children's feelings and instinct. Without this validation, children learn to give in to what others seem sure about. As adults, they may deny their instincts to the point where they acquiesce to relationships they don't really want. They may then believe it's up to them to make the relationship work. They may rationalize why they have to try so hard in the relationship as though it were normal to struggle daily to get along with your mate. And so if that's you, if you're struggling daily to get along, what she's saying here that's not normal. That's not the way it should be. It shouldn't be a constant struggle. While effort is needed to maintain communication and connection in a relationship, it shouldn't feel like constant, unrewarding work. Whew. The truth is, if both partners fit each other, understand each other's feelings, and are positive and supportive, relationships are primarily pleasurable, not arduous. It isn't asking too much to generally feel happy when you see your partner or look forward to time together. When people say you can't have everything, they're really saying they don't have what they need. What? Oh, yeah, sorry. The new book title, just click the link. It's right in my bio there. It's Disentangling from Emotionally Immature People. But if you just click the link, it'll take you right to the pre-sale. So glad I moved on from past 2 relationships. Grateful for the intuition. Yes. Yes, Mayor. You can't be so picky. I'd say be pickier. I was actually speaking to my 9-year-old. I don't know how we got to the topic yesterday. We were talking about friends, not relationship. And I said, when you switch to your new school, because he was sharing some nerves about when he has to switch schools in 6th grade. And I was telling him what most people do is they go sit down on the first day of a new class, and whoever's sitting next to them, that ends up being, one of those 3 people sitting next to you ends up being your friends for, the duration of your schooling career. I said, you can't, that's not a smart way to do it. There is infinite number of people around you. What you should be doing is the first month you go in there, you should be meeting everybody, getting a feel for everybody, hanging out, playing with everyone, and making a more aware and conscious decision of this person feels like is going to be a good fit for me. And because I told them what happens is even kids who mean well will end up with the wrong crowd, and all of a sudden that crowd drags you down, especially later in high school. And so we have to have more awareness, more consciousness, more inner decisiveness about who we're going to build these relationships with, especially in a time where you're going to be with them so much of the time. And I think the same thing applies to our relationships, especially early in life. Most of us just end up in relationships because, whether it's, feelings or just, whoever asks us out, or whoever we're initially attracted to. And instead, if you were going to do it again, the obvious smart approach is to be a much more investigative before we jump into these relationships, right? We probably could have all saved ourselves a lot of heartache if we had done it that way. Many people can readily enumerate all the reasons why they should be satisfied and be shy about admitting that they aren't. They blame themselves for not having the right feelings. Oof. Facts on that. And a little more about relationships. Relationships are sustained by the pleasure of emotional intimacy, the feeling that someone is interested in taking the time to really listen and understand your experience. If you don't have that, your relationship won't thrive. Mutual emotional responsiveness is the single most essential ingredient of human relationships. If you don't have that, your relationship won't thrive. Wow. And finally, for now on romantic relationships, I want to matter the most to someone. I want someone to be with me. She's talking about a patient of hers. This is what she said to her. I want to matter most to someone. I want someone to be with me. Then she looked confused and said, is that too much to ask? I really don't know. Since childhood, Megan had been trained to think that her natural desire to feel special and loved was selfish. Throughout her marriage, her husband reinforced this by telling her that she wanted too much and her expectations were too high. Until she stopped believing that until she stopped believing that he knew more about her than she did. Yeah, that's something we all have to really internalize, right? Nobody knows more about my experience than me and what I want, and I should, honor that. Is that too much to ask? Yeah, the obvious answer is no. That is the very first thing you should ask for. That is the basic of relationship, to feel loved and special, right? What is the point of being in a relationship that doesn't make you feel that way? EIP is emotionally immature parents or people. That's all we're doing, Sean. We're reading pages. But you've come in near the end, so we won't read too much more today. Which one for a screenshot? Based on where you commented, maybe this one? This is about all relationships. A core focus is on parents. If you want the relationship, click the link in my bio and check out the new book from her called Disentangling from Emotionally Immature People. It's not out yet. This is a pre-copy, but it's coming out soon, so you can go pre-order it. Lacking self-confidence due to parental rejection, which I think probably a lot of us resonate with, or at least have at some point of our lives. When parents reject or emotionally neglect their children, these children often grow up to expect the same from other people. They lack confidence that others could be interested in them. Instead of asking for what they want, their low self-confidence makes them shy and conflicted about seeking attention. They're convinced they would be bothering others if they tried to make their needs known. Unfortunately, by expecting past rejection to repeat itself, these children end up stifling themselves and promoting more emotional loneliness. Now, I always talk about this idea that when we say I'm an introvert, which I myself identify as an introvert, but in reading this book and a number of books like it, what I realized was that I have to be very mindful that in the moments where I'm using introversion as an excuse, that it's not actually just that what I'm doing is not actually just masking a trauma response. So when I say I don't want to go to that thing because I'm in quote unquote introvert, some of the time it's exactly what she's talking about here. Because I was feeling, not confident enough to go in a new situation, meet new people, especially if you're going to like a party where most of the people you don't know, things like that. We just use the excuse of introversion when in reality, if we really dug in and did the work, we'd recognize at least some aspect of it is just a trauma response and ultimately fear. Right? That doesn't mean that introversion doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that you have to feel guilty every time you don't want to go out. It just means that we have to be aware of where that line is and make sure we're not, falling too often on the side of a trauma response as opposed to actual introversion, which is needing time alone to recharge, which many of us do, and that's okay. Nobody is fully extroverted or introverted. That's maybe true. I mean, there might be some people, but yeah, there's probably a balance for most people. So here's another story here, a patient named Ben, and she said, when I suggested to Ben that he could try opening up to Alexa, his wife, given how supportive she was, because she says in the story, he's scared to reach out to anyone because he couldn't do that in childhood. He told me that he thought he should be more self-reliant, saying, I should be able to weather this on my own. Isn't it up to me to meet my own emotional needs? What a lonely thought. I told Ben that we all need other people to meet our emotional needs for comfort and closeness. That's what relationships are all about. Yes. And that's in part what we're trying to do is build this community where, if we didn't have the emotional support early in life, we at least now find our people, find the community where we can find that kind of emotional support so we don't have to weather it completely on our own, because that's not the way it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be up to each individual to meet their own emotional needs, at least not entirely. In some respect, yes, of course, we have to be responsible for ourselves. But as she says, that's what relationships are all about, the supporting one another. As humans, we were raised in communities, evolution-wise. Right? We weren't so individualized like we are today. And that's, we're seeing the effects of that with the highest rates of anxiety, depression, mental health issues that we've ever had, even at a time where we have the most insight and most awareness of what makes those things come about and the resources to deal with them. And yet we're still suffering, right? We're still at max suffering. So what is that telling us, right? I think that's actually... let's read one little section more, and then we'll call it for today. Parental rejection doesn't always result in low self-confidence. Some intelligent, resilient people somehow manifest a confidence to pursue good careers and reach high levels of achievement. Many find emotionally mature partners, enjoy satisfying long-term relationships, and create close families of their own. But despite their emotional needs being met in current relationships, the lingering trauma of childhood loneliness may haunt them in other ways through anxiety, depression, or bad dreams. Yeah, and that's what we just spoke about, right? Oh, we're actually at the end of the chapter. We made it. All right, let me just finish then. Didn't realize we were so close. I thought this line was powerful. Their parents may technically be present, but they offer little help, protection, or comfort. For anyone who experienced more little T trauma, this is probably resonates. And then finally today, why it feels so bad to live without emotional connection. There's a reason why people have such a strong need for emotional connection with others. Throughout human evolution, being part of a group has always meant more safety and less stress. Our ancestors who most disliked separation were more likely to survive because they enjoyed the safe feeling of being close to others. Early humans who didn't mind isolation, on the other hand, may have been comfortable with more distance than was good for their survival. So when you're longing for a deep emotional connection, remind yourself that your painful feeling of aloneness is coming not just from your individual history, but also from human genetic memory. Just like you, our distant ancestors had a strong need for emotional closeness. Your need for attention and connection is as old as the human race. You have prehistoric reasons for not liking to be lonely. Wow. And again, thank you, Andrea, for signing up to the book club. And that's what we're trying to build, right? Speaking of the book club here, that's what we're trying to build, is this community, is getting rid of this separation, is using the power of social media to bring us together, and then using the power of books to drive us forward, to evolve, to get better, to enjoy our lives more, to find meaning and purpose in the day-to-day, to not just be going through it, kind of dragging ourselves behind us. And so the last couple of months, we looked at kind of the macro of that philosophy through the books that you see up here at the top, The Untethered Soul, The Power of Now in particular. We use those to kind of understand that how do we relax and release into these difficult emotions. And we did that, purposely, so that now, as we undertake this month of adult children of emotionally mature parents, we have those strategies in place for what do I do when these difficult feelings come up. And we do that so it allows us to continue moving forward, to continue uncovering, to continue sitting with those emotions, with those experiences, and allow them to be transmuted from darkness into light. We don't need our parents' help with that. We don't need our parents to be different. We don't need our parents to tell us they're proud of us, or they love us, or to hug us in a way that they've never done before. We can do all that for ourselves. We just have to develop the tools. We have to develop the understanding. We have to develop some insight into our experience that allows us to finally just say, oh, that's what I went through. That's why I feel like that. That makes total sense. That makes absolute sense of why I should be feeling the way I'm feeling. So now that I understand that, how can I move forward? Regardless of whether our parents change or not, right? And that's a doubly true for people whose parents are no longer here. Right? For those people, you can never have that. You can never have that parent that changes, but that's okay. And she talks about that. And we talked about that in our chat with her this past weekend, that you can do this for yourself. You don't need your parents' help in coming to terms with what you experience and to transmuting that darkness into light.